So I want to talk today about my Bonhoeffer Oratorium. It's my longest work, more than 2 hours. One of my few pieces with a full symphony orchestra, and one of my few pieces of sacred music. We'll be hearing excerpts from this piece, and also talking with Hans Wielands, a retired Deutsche Bank executive, who had an important role in the evolution of this piece. But first I need to tell you a little about Dietrich Bonhoeffer in case you don't know about this theologian. He was born in 1906, studied with the best theologians of the period in Berlin. But as Hitler's popularity came around, he refused to go with the crowd and instead wrote articles and did sermons defending Jews, talking against militarism, and even to the point of doing a text that said, we just want a good, responsible chancellor. We don't need a charismatic Führer. But of course, texts like this were totally censored as soon as the Nazi machine started working around 1934. And when the war began, all young German men became soldiers, including pastors and theologians. But in Bonhoeffer's case, he managed to get assigned to military intelligence, along with his brother. And the two of them, simultaneously, with great danger, also participated in the German resistance that was going to try to assassinate Hitler. That is, until the Gestapo got the list of all the conspirators, and leading to Bonhoeffer being in jail for over a year until he was finally executed. He was forbidden to preach, forbidden to publish, but while he was in jail, he managed to smuggle out letters to his former student Eberhard Bethge, who later wrote a very long, important biography of Dietrich Bonhoeffer. The Oratorio begins, part one, with 4 sermons that Bonhoeffer gave while he was still in his 20s. Goes on in part 2 with the political writings from 1932-33. But then in part 3, the text comes mostly from a book that he wrote in an underground seminary where he was teaching in 1937-39. And then it ends with his most radical theology, as expressed in the letters from prison. I want our first musical excerpt to be one of the 8 short a cappella choruses from the end of the Oratorio, all taken from the prison letters. Like all oratorios, this chorus is sung in the original language, German, but the English translation would be, God is almighty and weak in the world, and just in this way is he with us and helping us. Like the rest of the oratorio, the style is minimal with a limited scale, and here there is only a single melody. But the music echoes back and forth between the choir on the left and the choir on the right. And each time, the combination of voices is a little different.
Wir können nicht redlich sein, ohne zu erkennen, dass wir in der Welt leben müssen, et si Deus non daretur. Und eben dies erkennen wir vor Gott. Gott selbst zwingt uns zu dieser Erkenntnis. Gott gibt uns zu wissen, dass wir leben müssen als solche, die mit dem Leben ohne Gott fertig werden.
Gott gibt uns zu wissen, 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 dass wir leben müssen, 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 als solche, die mit dem Leben ohne Gott.
God is unmighty, says Bonhoeffer, which is a total change after centuries of Christian theology which insisted that God was almighty. It's not hard to understand that from a Berlin prison cell in 1944, with bombs going off every day, it was difficult to believe that God was controlling anything. And if we jump to the anti-segregation demonstrations in the United States in the 1960s, it's not hard to see the parallel with the suffering of American blacks and the radical preaching of Martin Luther King. The two theologians together made a strong statement in favor of Christianity that would take an active position in the affairs of the world. These theologians were studied carefully, both in Catholic and Protestant seminaries at the time, leading to the changes in the Christian religion, leading to the churches taking an active role in political events, which we saw in Budapest, and then in Gdansk, and of course in East Germany before the fall of the wall. Another prison letter says that God is suffering in a godless world. Did you ever hear anyone talk about God in an anthropomorphic way and say that God could suffer the way we do? Certainly God could not have been very pleased with World War II, and it's not hard to agree with Bonhoeffer that he was suffering. Another fragment that became a chorus in the part 4 of the Oratorio says, God lets us know that we must live as ones who are ready to live without God. In other words, don't just pray and wait for God to take care of everything. We are not the children of God. We are now the adults of God. And we must be responsible ourselves.
Juli 1944. Der Gott, der mit uns ist der Gott, der uns verlässt.
Gott ist ohnmächtig und schwach in der Welt. Gott ist ohnmächtig und schwach in der Welt. Gott ist ohnmächtig und schwach in der Welt. Gott ist ohnmächtig und schwach in der Welt.
But let's talk to Hans. Hans, you're still in your summer home in Portugal. It's how nice to see you. We haven't seen you for a long time.
That's right.
I want you to try to remember the night that we met in Maastricht in 1996 at the occasion of the world premiere of the Bonhoeffer Oratorio. What do you remember from that night?
Well, that was an extraordinary day. I was there with friends, and we had several other things in our mind. And, well, of course, a cultural event should also be attended, but we didn't know anything. And on that day, there was only your oratory, but we didn't know you, and we didn't know whether perhaps Bonhoeffer had written an oratory. Okay, so we were open-minded and waited what would wait for us. And the performance started with silence. And we got a little bit nervous, but on the other side, we were quiet and we were very attentive and alert to see what would happen.
Hans is talking about Angst vor der Stille, silence, fear of silence. That's one of his early sermons. And he says we're afraid of the silence just because God might speak to us in the silence. It's a wonderful sermon.
Yes, it is indeed. And, well, then we were confronted with the theology of Bonhoeffer, and that was for me a lightning strike. This theology was so different to that what I learned in a little village at the Dutch border in the Catholic Church. God being and knocking probably at our door as in the guise of a beggar or a helpless man or woman, that showed us what really the responsibility will be for us in this world. Not going to church and all these things. And Bonhoeffer, in my opinion, he was the truth prophet of Christianity, and we learned much. And if we had learned it earlier, perhaps we would have behaved differently in the Second World War and in the Nazi time.
How do you, can you tell us a little bit about how this led to the performance in Berlin in 1998, 2 years later?
Yes, because I was so so struck of the oratory, I swore to myself to do my utmost to initialize the first performance in Germany. And I went behind the curtains in order to find you, and we had a wonderful speech. And well, I don't know whether it was at that evening, but you were looking for artist who could do a performance in Germany, and I was looking for getting the financial means which were necessary. And I spoke to a lot of people and talked with them about this experience in Maastricht, and asked them whether they had an idea. But at least I was lucky because we had in the group of Deutsche Bank a foundation which was for financing extraordinary cultural events. And well, I got some supporters of the idea, and at least they were ready to spend 200,000, and that was the start for Berlin. And in addition to that, I invited the customers of my company to attend the performance and to bring with them the conductors of their local choruses. And so we got more than 1,000 people in the Berliner Philharmonie, and all of them were quite happy to have been there for this extraordinary day.
Do you remember any particular moments from the oratorio? Because we can only show a few excerpts here to listen to, but is there any particular moments that you would like us to include?
Well, I was very happy because you had told me that the Protestant church was very reluctant with your oratory. And I spoke to the bishop, that was Professor Huber at that day, the Bishop of Berlin and Brandenburg of the Protestant church. And he was quite excited. And I think he tried to compensate the reluctance of the Protestant church against Bonhoeffer. And it was something like an eye point that he was ready to speak the last words in the oratory.
I think Germans, of course, Bonhoeffer was not an innocent victim. When he was executed, he was guilty of treason. Being part of an assassination attempt is a serious crime in any almost any country, and so he was lawfully executed. But and I think that many Germans think, well, he was a criminal then. He wasn't a good theologian who was trying to save us and help us. He was a criminal who deserved to be executed. There's a problem there, huh?
Well, of course, I cannot judge about this, but I have the feeling, because I'm too young, I have the feeling that that he is rehabilitated, and that most Germans are sure that he is a true prophet of modern Christianity.
That's wonderful. Thank you for saying that. It's wonderful to talk with you.
It's wonderful for me to see you again.
Do you still listen to the oratorio? I remember there was a time when you were listening every day in your car and at home, and it was so important for you. Do you still listen today?
Of course. Well, it's a habit, especially here in Portugal, for my wife and me to listen to the oratory and to think about the sermon and the theology of Bonhoeffer, and of course to listen to your music and especially to the new song.
I want to end this broadcast with the new song. And this, it's a very important part. Because I've already recorded about that.
It's a very important song. And I saw it when I spoke to several members of the board of Deutsche Bank. And when I showed or asked them to listen to the performance in Dutch in Holland, and they were much older than I, and they had lived in that time, and when they heard the soldiers, and they couldn't bear it, and so they wanted to support me, but on the other side they said, well, but our customers, what will they think, and so on. And well, but nevertheless, at least they supported me, and so we were lucky to convince the foundation.
Well, let's keep singing the new song.
Ah. Glad to hear it.
The segments we heard from Part 4 were from the Maastricht performance. But now I want you to hear something from the Berlin performance. Part 3 gives us Bonhoeffer's advice about how we should look for expensive grace rather than cheap grace, how we must bear our crosses, how we must accept that we ourselves are guilty for many of the things that come about. But even now, forbidden to preach, forbidden to publish, and leading a difficult life of political resistance, Bonhoeffer remained deeply a believer, with faith in God, love of life, and a hope for the future, and he tells us that we must be deeply thankful and sing a new song. This new song, this Canticum Novum, is heard over and over in the Psalms, and it is one of the themes of Christian music for centuries. But the new song, this Neue Lied, the new song of Dietrich Bonhoeffer, has a message and an urgency that I find particularly strong. Even in the horrible Nazi period, Bonhoeffer never forgot that God loves us all, that we must sing a new song for him. I think this deeply felt Bonhoeffer message can be heard clearly in this performance in the Philharmonie in Berlin in 1998, conducted by Klaus-Peter Flor.
Singet und spielet dem Herrn ein neues Lied. Das neue Lied wird zuerst im Herzen gesungen. Das neue Lied, das neue das Herz singt, weil es von Christus erfüllt ist. Das neue Lied, das neue Lied. Wo das Herz nicht mitsingt, dort gibt es nur grünliches Durcheinander menschlichen Selbstruhms. Das neue Lied, 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 das neue Lied.
Auf diesem Wort neu liegt der Ton. Was ist das neue Lied anders als das Lied, das den Menschen neu macht?
Das neue Lied.
Das neue Lied ist das Lied, das Gott selbst neu in uns erweckt.
Das neue Lied.
Es ist das an jedem Morgen neue Christuslied.
Das neue Lied.
Es ist das Lied der Morgensterne und der Kinder Gottes vor Erschaffung der Welt.
Das neue Lied.
Es ist das neue Lied, das von der ganzen Gemeinde Gottes auf Erden und im Himmel gesungen wird.
Das neue Lied.
Es ist das Lied, das wir mit zu singen berufen sind.
Das neue Lied.
Gott hat sich das Lied in Ewigkeit bereitet, und wer zur Gemeinde Gottes hinzutritt, der stimmt in dieses Lied mit ein.
Das neue Lied. Das neue Lied. Das neue Lied. Das neue Lied.
Das neue Lied. Das neue Lied. Kinder Israel nach dem Durchzug durch das Rote Meer. Es ist das Magnificat der Maria nach der Verkündigung. Es ist das Lied der Sänger am gläsernen Meer nach ihrer Errettung. Es ist das Lied des Paulus und Silas in der Nacht des Gefängnisses. Es ist das Lied Moses und des Lammes. Es ist das neue Lied der himmlischen Gemeinde.
Das neue Lied.
Es ist das Lied, das den Leichtsinnigen zur Einkehr ruft. Es ist das Lied, das den Sünder zur Umkehr ruft. Es ist das Lied, das den Heimatlosen zur Heimkehr ruft. Es ist das Lied, das den Weinenden zur Freude ruft. Es ist das Lied, das den Säugling in der Taufe zu Gott ruft. Es ist der Lobgesang in der Nacht unseres Lebens und unseres Todes. Es ist das Lied, das über dem Totenbett die Hoffnung der Auferstehung verkündigt. Es ist das Lied, das uns umfangen wird, wenn wir die Augen zutun.
Das neue
Das neue, neue, neue